Hi, scholars. We're going to continue our chapter 4 today. We left off on page 40. We're right up here at the top where it says, What Count Olaf asked. And the children have just made the dinner for Count Olaf's troop, and they spent all day making it. And he comes home disappointed that it is not roast. So we'll continue. What? Count Olaf asked. No roast beef. You didn't tell us you wanted roast beef, Klaus said. Count Olaf slid towards the children so that he looked even taller than he was. His eyes grew even brighter, and his one eyebrow raised in anger. In agreeing to adopt you, he said, I have become your father, and as your father, I am not someone to be trifled with. I demand that you serve roast beef to myself and my guest. We don't have any, Violet cried. We made pantanuska sauce. No, 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 Sunny shouted. Count Olaf looked down at Sunny, who had spoken so suddenly. With an inhuman roar, he picked her up in one scraggly hand and raised her so that she was staring at him in the eye. Needless to say, Sunny was very frightened and began crying immediately, too scared to even try to bite the hand that held her. Put her down immediately, you beast, Klaus shouted. He jumped up, trying to rescue Sunny from the grasp of the Count, but he was holding her too high to reach. Count Olaf looked down at Klaus and smiled a terrible, toothy grin, raising the wailing Sunny up even higher in the air. He seemed about to drop her to the floor when there was a large burst of laughter in the next room. Olaf, where's Olaf? Voices called out. Count Olaf paused, still holding the wailing Sunny up in the air, as members of his theater troupe walked into the kitchen. Soon as they were crowding the room, an assortment of strange-looking characters of all shapes and sizes, there was a bald man with a very long nose, dressed in a long black robe. There were two women who had bright white powder all over their faces, making them look like ghosts. Behind the woman was Behind the woman was a man with very long and skinny arms, at the end of which were two hooks instead of hands. There was a person who was extremely fat and who looked like neither a man nor a woman. And behind this person, standing in the doorway, were an assortment of people the children could not see, but who promised to be just as frightening. Here you are, Olaf, said one of the white-faced women. Let me move down the screen. Sorry, guys. Right there at the top. Here you are, Olaf, said one of the white-faced women. What in the world are you doing? I'm just disciplining these orphans, Count Olaf said. I asked them to make dinner, and all they have made is some disgusting sauce. You can't go easy on children, the man with the hook hand said. They must be taught to obey their elders. The tall, bald man peered at the youngsters. Are these, he said to be, are these, he said to Count Olaf, those wealthy children you were telling me about? Yes, Count Olaf said. They are so awful I can scarcely stand to touch them. With that, he lowered Sunny, who was still wailing, to the floor. Violet and Klaus breathed a sigh of relief that he had not dropped her from that great height. I don't blame you, said someone in the doorway. Count Olaf rubbed his hands together as if he'd been holding something revolting instead of an infant. Well, enough talk, he said. Suppose we will eat their dinner, even though it is all wrong. Everyone follow me to the dining room, and I will pour us some wine. Perhaps by the time these brats serve us, we will be too drunk to care if it's roast beef or not. Hurrah! Cried several members of the troop, and they marched through the kitchen, following Count Olaf into the dining room. Nobody paid a bit of attention to the children, except for the bald man who stopped and stared Violet in the eye. You're a pretty one, he said, taking her face in his rough hands. If I were you, I would try not to anger Count Olaf, or he might wreck that pretty little face of yours. Violet shuddered, and the bald man gave a high-pitched giggle and left the room. The Baudelaire children, alone in the kitchen, found themselves breathing heavily as if they had just run a long distance. Sunny continued to wail, and Klaus found that his eyes were wet with tears as well. Only Violet didn't cry, but merely trembled with fear and revulsion, a word which means an unpleasant mixture of horror and disgust. For several moments, none of them could speak. This is terrible, terrible, Klaus said finally. Violet, what can we do? All right, we'll pause right there and continue tomorrow.